every day when you look at our context, you see issues of extreme events, weather events. You see issues of deforestation. You see issues of desertification. We are looking at biodiversity loss. We are looking at reducing water levels, which are affecting our livelihoods. We are looking at incidences of pollution. And all this in terms of the effects that they have. You see an effect in terms of our economic livelihoods, especially those who are working in agriculture. You see an effect on our human security. And it seems that this concept of sustainable development has been something hard to look at it at the greater context of climate and environment. And while all this is happening, we see journalists continuing to play a very important role, given that, they are the fourth estate. And they have been playing a critical role in terms of, shaping the discourse around climate and environmental issues in Africa and globally. They have been playing the role in informing and educating the public about these very important issues, as well as pushing for accountability from the different duty bearers. But as this is happening on one end, when you look at the other side of the coin, climate and environmental journalists are increasingly operating in a very threatening context, very hostile context in the different countries, where we see reports of attacks against journalists, we see issues of abuse, issues of harassment, and in some cases, even lethal reports with cases of climate and environmental journalists who have lost their lives in the course of their professional duties. And so it's very important as stakeholders to really take stock of the climate and environmental issues that are affecting Africa and see how we can navigate the challenging operating context, especially for climate and environmental journalists, but also in doing so, really as we appreciate the role that they play, that we see how we as stakeholders can come together and strengthen this very important role of climate and environmental journalists. So in doing so, this webinar pursues certain objectives. And the first is to see how we can highlight the specific experiences of climate and environmental journalists, especially in Africa. And in doing so, we are providing them with a platform where they can speak about their experiences and share their stories, their challenges, and also any best practices that we can learn so that we can actually share this knowledge and really strengthen reporting in this context. We also want to see, this is something that we have to do as stakeholders. We are all invested in a better environment for all of us, because it does has a ripple effect on all other rights. And so we need to see how we as stakeholders can come together and see how we can actually work together towards an effective protection and promotion of environmental journalism in Africa, and hope this will have, an effect in the global scale. And another objective of this particular webinar is to see how we can really discuss the practical strategies as well as initiatives that are in place or that we should have in place to enhance the safety and security of environmental journalists as they continue to perform their role. And finally, let's see how we can inspire as well as facilitate partnerships so that we can jointly advocate for the protection and strengthening of environmental journalists, as well as, make use of all the relevant support mechanisms. So in terms of housekeeping, before I introduce, you're going to be guided by an esteemed panel of experts who are going to, guide us through these particular subjects. But before I can introduce them, some housekeeping. As you've seen, based on our a few mishaps here at the beginning, we do have translation services in both French and Portuguese. So we are quite inclusive linguistically in that regard. And by now, I'm sure you're either on the English channel, the French channel, or the Portuguese channel. So you can engage in either of these. We are also going to record this webinar. I'm just going to, from our end, Nompilo is leading that sector, and we are going to record this webinar. It will be available on IPI's website. So if you want to go back and listen to the panelists and the input from the participants as well, if you want to share this particular webinar, feel free to do so. You will find it on IPI's website as well as our socials. At the end of the webinar, we are going to have a Q&A. So it will give, participants a chance to also give their insights, share their insights, or also pose any questions to the panelists. So feel free to do that at the end of the session. But as we are continuing with the webinar, if you have a burning question, if you have a burning comment and intervention, feel free to also use the chat function. Just jot down your question there. Some panelists in the course of the webinar can choose to respond, or we can do so during the Q&A at the end of it all. So with that having been put aside, we're done with housekeeping. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the day. I will start with Farah Well. Farah is the Director of Advocacy Engagement at the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers, Women in the News, based in Cairo. Farah oversees WIN Social Impact Reporting Initiative grants, the WIN Gender Balance Tracker, and global advocacy campaigns, among other efforts to advance gender equality and inclusion across Africa, the Arab region, and Southeast Asia. We'll hear a little bit more about her work shortly. Our second panelist is Ibrahima Yakubu. Ibrahima is a renowned environmental journalist and founder of the African Climate Reporters. He's a multilingual and multi-media broadcaster. He has worked with various local and international media organizations. He currently serves as the national president of the Network of Peace Journalists in Nigeria. He also wears very many other hats, including being a book author, a translator, a publisher, a poet, and lecturer. He obtained his education in Nigeria and in several European institutions, focusing on communication, media, and environmental studies. He's also a governing member of the African Institute of Waste Management and Recycling and a member of the Marine Journalist Network in Europe. He also coordinates the network of science and environmental journalists in West Africa. At present, he spearheads a monthly climate hangout, which is an interactive forum that brings together various stakeholders. And through his remarkable contributions, he has garnered various awards at the national and international level. Welcome, Ibrahima. Our third panelist is Tulani Ngwenya. He is an associate at the Oxpeckers Investigative Environmental Journalism. He's an editor and investigative journalist with more than 8 years of experience exposing environmental crime, systemic corruption, and social injustice across Southern Africa. He contributes to Business Live's Financial Mail Fox, where he covers topics around extractives, mining, and energy, with a sharp focus on governance and accountability in critical sectors. He's a former editor of the High Veld Chronicle. He has also collaborated with the Southern African Accountability Journalism Project, and he's trained under WWF's Ketha program and Oxpeckers Wild Eye Academy. He holds a master's in cultural and media studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he's currently pursuing a PhD in communication in the University of Fort Hare, and his reporting is informed by certifications in climate change journalism, wildlife crime, and advanced digital research. And last but not least is my colleague, Lydia Kembabazi, Africa manager at the International Press Institute. She's a human rights lawyer with successful experience in management and implementation of projects on rule of law, human rights protection and promotion. And she has extensive experience in developing and managing legal advocacy projects, grants management, network and partnership building, and she has worked with various organizations in Africa, Asia, and Europe in the NGO, academic, and private sector. Most recently, she served as the legal advocacy officer with the Institute for Human Rights and Development in Africa. So welcome to all our panelists. Thank you very much for giving us the platform or joining this platform to share your knowledge and expertise with us on this topic. So I ended with Lydia, and I'm going to start with her for us to kick off this particular webinar. At the beginning, I mentioned that our webinar is inspired and is part of the activities and a recent project launched by IPI on climate and environmental journalism. So Lydia, I want to give you the floor initially just to, share a little bit about IPI's projects. What do we seek to achieve with this project? Just to, set up the springboard for our discussion today. Lydia, over to you.
Greetings, everyone, from the International Press Institute, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Like Nompilo mentioned, I will also reiterate, kindly let us know your name, your country, organization, and where you're joining us from. My name is Lydia Winnie Kembabazi. I am the Africa Program Manager at IPI. And quickly to talk about our recently launched project on top of our Great Climate Journalism Under Fire report. This project, whose main objective is to strengthen press freedom and protect journalists covering climate and environmental issues as part of IPI's broader mission to promote independent journalism and resilient media ecosystems across Africa. We recognize that strengthening environmental and climate journalism not only requires greater analytical capacity, but also a conscious effort to frame stories within their wider context of political, economic, social context, ensuring that report moves beyond headlines, but drive meaningful public understanding and accountability. For this project, therefore, we seek to strengthen environmental reporting in Africa through monitoring and documentation of press violations on climate and environmental journalism, and publications, actions including development of strong legal and policy frameworks that protect human rights, but inadvertently climate and environmental journalists. This program will definitely benefit journalists and local CSOs and the general public in 10 target countries with a primary focus on Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Mozambique, South Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, with additional countries in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Rwanda, but also supporting the broader network of media, human rights, and environmental actors. We also aim to empower a diverse coalition of civil society organizations to carry out strategic evidence-based advocacy support of climate and environmental journalism. Ultimately, the African public, the global community benefit from stronger independent media capable of exposing social consequences of environmental and contribute to more accountable governance. This webinar that will a big why, therefore, will delve into fundamental reasons why robust climate impactful journalism is not merely a niche, but an indispensable pillar of an informed society and a sustainable future. We hope to explore the state of climate and environmental journalism, not only in the sub-Saharan region and identified countries, but in general in the African continent, identifying the gaps, the needs, and opportunities for multi-stakeholder collaboration on the national, regional, and global civil society groups. I hope that this webinar, therefore, will be a catalyst for change in the call to continue championing the safety and security of journalists who contribute to an informed public and accountable leadership through climate and environmental reporting, ultimately creating a strong, independent media capable of exposing societal consequences of climate change, environmental degradation. I thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to fruitful deliberations. Much, Mary Stella.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for at least giving us a brief on IPI's program. But and thank you for that, and just building upon that and following that approach of what organizations are doing, let's also hear more about what the other organizations from which our panelists hail are doing with regards to climate and environmental issues. So I'll go to you, Tulani. Oxpeca's investigative environmental journalism does have what sort of pioneered the investigative environmental journalism unit in Africa. That was the first in Africa, if I'm not wrong. Please correct me if I am. So please, I want you to just share a little bit about your work with this unit. As a pioneer, what tools are you using? What achievements have you noted from this particular unit and the work that Oxpecas is doing? Over to you, Tulani.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you so much for everyone who has managed to join this webinar today.
Tulani, I'm not sure if you're speaking. I can't hear you. I don't know if you're on the English channel.
I can hear him very
well. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear him.
I can hear you too.
Okay, thank you so much. So as I was saying, my name is Tulani Ngwenya, and I'm based in South Africa. And currently I'm working with Oxpeckers Investigative Environmental Journalism here in South Africa. So the work that we do at Oxpeckers is quite profound because we use critical tools, open source tools in our investigations, such as the Wild Eye tool, where we track wildlife crimes, and also the Power Tracker, where we map energy and power across Southern Africa. So most of the work that we do is to expose systematic abuse of power, corruption, using data in our investigations. Because when Oxpeckers was founded, it was founded to fill a gap that existed during that period around 2012, where most investigations lacked data and tech-driven in investigations. So we came in to fill that gap, and over the years, most of our tools and our methods have been adopted and employed by other journalists across Africa and the world.
Thank you for that, Tulani. Could you mention some of the African countries that you see your tools being deployed? Are you working all across Africa, or there are select priority countries or countries of interest that you have?
So we work across the globe, and most of our tools, like the Wild Eye tool, has been used in Southern Africa in countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, Eswatini. The Power Tracker is being used in countries like Zimbabwe as well, South Africa, and it's going to be used in other countries as well.
Thank you for that. You could even share a link on the chat for some of the work that you're doing, and participants can visit the website when we are done. Thank you for that, Tulani. And now over to you, Farah. You have an interesting project that looks at issues of climate and environmental reporting through an intersectional lens that focuses on gender. So when it comes to women in the news, I believe you have a small grants project that is part of your social impact reporting initiative. Tell us a little bit more about that program and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Maria Stella, and thank you, everyone. Just to briefly introduce Women in News, or WIN, the program is targeting women journalists across different levels. So from training women journalists in general to working with media organizations for gender equality in leadership and in content. But as part of that, we also have SIRI, which is the Social Reporting Initiative, and that project has been running since 2020. It started as, response to the COVID-19 pandemic across the world, supporting freelance journalists, women journalists, and media organizations to keep working through the difficult times. But then in 2021, because the World News Day, which is end of September 28th, the theme for World News Day in 2021 was around climate coverage and the climate crisis. We decided to launch a cycle of SIRI that focused on climate reporting, and it was targeting freelance women journalists across sub-Saharan Africa, the Arab region, and Southeast Asia, the countries where we operate. And we received over 200 applications for that, and sadly, it was a small grant. It was we only accepted 15, but these 15 women journalists did at least 4 pieces each. So we created a number of pieces of content around climate coverage and climate crisis across the different countries. But the idea was not just to cover climate, but to cover climate from that intersectional lens and perspective, which is what we're trying to promote through CERI and through the program in general, is how to cover issues from that that focus on marginalized communities, that focus on women, on people with disabilities, and people in geographical locations that are not usually covered. So that was our cycle. And we've had different cycles of CERI that focused on different things, but that specific cycle on climate coverage was really a huge success, getting over 200 applications. And we have to understand that as part of WIN, as part of being part of the WIN community, you have a very strong network of women journalists across all these countries. So that is also an aspect of the community. We have the WIN alums community. So when you graduate or when you go through the WIN program, the accelerator program, afterwards you don't just go away, you become part of the WIN community. So that also links up a lot of the women journalists across Africa, so they can do cross-regional investigations or cross-country investigations as well, whether about climate or other things. I hope that kind of quickly answered your question, Maria Stella.
It does. It even expands it, because it's not even just through the lens of gender. It's a more inclusive and more holistic lens. So thank you very much for that. I'll come back to you shortly after we hear from Ibrahima, who is the founder, as I mentioned, of African Climate Reporters. Please tell us a little bit more about your organization in terms of, what gap you intended to fill when you had that vision to, found this particular organization. Ibrahima, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is just to say a very beautiful morning to all my people here watching live and direct and those who are listening. Well, actually, it came up during our African Climate Reporters came up after a meeting we had somewhere in Nigeria, where we assembled some West African science and environment journalists. And we are focusing at that time is about the protections of plant and animal species that are facing extinction in the region due to human irrational activities. We discover in our research at then 70% of our newsroom are not producing issues related to climate journalism reporting. So most of the news is just unnecessary news that are disturbing the people. Then we decided to come up and mobilize some science journalists within the African region there. How do we start reporting issues that is affecting our life today, which is reporting related to this climate journalism? Then from there, we start to have an annual conferences here organized by the African Climate Reporters, which we normally used to have our West African Science, Climate and Environment Journalism here in Nigeria. And then also this is a forum whereby we think we train the journalists effectively, because it's a 1 week event meeting with science, you understand, because we understood that one of the problem we have with our science journalists reporting or other journalists reporting into this aspect is the terms of science terminologies. This is discouraging most of our journalists reporting to this aspect. Then we decided to say annually we'll be mobilizing journalists from this region so that we can be deliberating, showing them more techniques, more ways to report. And at the same time, we send them because there are other scientists working inside African Climate Reporters. Then we syndicate this as a news to educate them through WhatsApp, because we have series of WhatsApp group and other training online. We used to do not, because the annual meeting is just once in a year, and we do is just the target is to make sure that we change the brain of our journalists to have large number of reporters in the future, so that they can be reporting issues related to climate change, environmental degradation, destructions of our forestry. As you can see, most of the forests are going because of human irrational activities, charcoal, firewood business, and extraction of natural resources keep making our forestry, but the human and animal also into migration. So also we have plans, and then there is no report related to this. Hence the need for us in African Climate to come up with an initiative which is target as training more journalists across the Africa. Target is to make sure that we change this whole idea of not to be reporting other issues pertaining, just to encourage them to be focused much on issues related to climate change. As I told you before, in our research, we discovered that 70% of our newsroom in Africa, you can cross-check, and you will see, you can hardly see a media that has a science journalist or environment or climate journalist. We are facing this scarcity in it. And most especially, we discover we have problem of women journalists into this science journal, into this climate journalism. So as a forum where we normally do, we encourage, like my assistant is a woman, which she always go with me anywhere we go, because we also dedicate issues related to these issues affecting Africa. So that is how we come about. We feel there is a need. And most of our research, we have a team of researchers apart from journalists. We have scientifically who are working for us. Target is not all we as journalists can discover these issues related to climate journalism, because it's a scientific terms. Yeah, of course, yes, you have to be a science-oriented journalist to be reporting issues there. So they make the research, they make us, and as for us, to educate the general public about issues related to human irrational activities, we have to now think of training more other of our colleagues who has to disseminate this information. Our goal every time, anywhere, is to make sure that we change the life of people and how people could also stop some activities that is destroying our environment. As I mentioned before, we don't have people like indigenous people into this problem of charcoal firewood business. But then we keep saying you keep destroying your environment and then you keep destroying your future. And you don't know, because they are into business. Poverty has pushed them into this. Hence, for us to come out as climate team, to be educating them in multiple languages. That's why I told you, as apart from being a multilingual, one of the best strategies we use is to make sure that we use multiple languages to disseminate this information using both online and offline, because we discover the problem is not in the city. Most problem is in the remote area. If you check, climate change issues is affecting most people living in the ghetto, crowded communities whereby they don't mind about destroying their environment, destructions of trees. Hence, they need to come up with an idea. Like of recently now, we discover the environment is having a serious problem related to flood. We have problem related to cholera. We have problem to microbiology, microorganism in the environment. Yet we have people falling sick, and yet we don't have enough report coming from the newsroom. Hence, they need to embark on serious campaign, encouraging upcoming journalists from the university. Of course, I do deliver lectures at the university, drawing the attention of upcoming writers to embrace this kind of science and environment, climate journalism as the future of what we think our own future of future journalism, because we are into collaborative journalism and hence to collaborate with every stakeholders to change the narrative. So you can see us in African climate reporters is not just it's a collective responsibility of science journalists, climate and environment, that we team up here to make sure that we double effort to educate the people about what their environment is, and also to hold authority accountable on issues that we discover there are some hit and hold somewhere to change the narrative. I think this is what we do. And as such, I told you, our newsroom is our major work now that we focus at, that every newsroom in Africa must have a science or environment or climate journalist that is reporting. If we embrace these techniques, I am telling you, we'll have a large news related, because I will tell you one, if you check any good stories coming from Africa, you discover most of these stories are not written by the journalists based in that area. Yet somebody will come from far away who will see the story and will come and write. Yet you are a journalist in that area, but because issues related to scientific terms of reporting, and then issues of other related issues of encouragement or tools to encourage the journalists to do this aspect is really a problem. And that is why every time when such an opportunity came about, we try to reschedule, change, educate, inform using multiple language and to disseminate information to make our life better for the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahima. Thank you for that. You have even preempted my next question, because my next question was going to be, how can newsrooms, how can journalists shape the reporting around climate and environmental issues in a way that resonates with, local audiences, with international audiences. And what I got from your just initial presentation is that let us speak in languages which are understood by our communities. Let us use the richness of language in the African context to, make sure these issues are diffused to the local areas, the remote areas, the informal settlements, for example, so that we are speaking in a language that is understood by local communities. So I will also now, push this question also to Farah, just still on the same issues. How do we ensure that we are reporting and telling stories about climate and environmental issues in a way that we can speak not only to communities, but even beyond to policy makers and other duty bearers and other stakeholders? So how can we ensure reporting is done in a way that actually leads to change? Farah, over to you.
Yeah, so I think building on what Ibrahima was saying as well, some of the most powerful climate stories, climate coverage stories that are coming out of Africa, and I would say across the world as well, are deeply rooted in lived realities. So we had an example in Kenya, for example, in one of the stories that came out of Siri that was talking about rising lake levels in the Rift Valley in Kenya. And if you talk about this as an abstract rising sea levels or rising lake levels, that might not resonate with a lot of people. Not a lot of people can see how that affects their lives day to day. But she, the journalist, her name was Cynthia. Cynthia's work really wove together the voices of the displaced families, the local experts and policymakers within the region itself. And also it contributed to the formation of a government task force to help those people that were suffering as a result of the rising lake levels. So you are now looking at coverage that connects people's day-to-day struggles and solutions to the bigger climate picture. So you're giving policymakers and you're giving international audiences as well the evidence they need to be able to act on this. We're not just talking about the numbers, which can go over a lot of people's head, and even policymakers sometimes, if they are not deeply rooted in the science or in the climate space, they might not see how that affects people's lives. So as journalists, one of the duties is to go and connect these dots and create that bigger picture so that anybody, whether at the community level or policy level, government level, wants to act, they can see, okay, so 1, 2, 3, this is what happens. And again, to build upon the idea of inclusive language, it's inclusive language, but also inclusive reporting that looks at how these struggles can affect the different communities differently, because it might have a different effect on men, on women, on children, people with disabilities, because how are people with disabilities evacuating, for example, and highlighting these really small, maybe seemingly small differences can show that the policy that comes out of it is not a generalized policy that maybe doesn't address a lot of the gaps, but really looks at how these policies can serve the communities as a whole and is inclusive in its approach. So this, I think, is how to really root it in the lived realities and the lived experiences of the people affected by climate crises.
Yes, thank you, Farah. Just listening to you is really hammering home the point about knowing your audience. If you're going to speak to local communities, if you're going to speak to policymakers, if you're going to speak to businesses, learn how to, craft the language, make use of language in a way that actually drives understanding and action from these various groups. And I remember, I think I was reading, I think it was a post where somebody says, often when we're in the CSO space sometimes, or in the academic space, you write a report, you use difficult languages. For example, in the climate change issue, we'll say anthropogenic factors. And that just sometimes glosses over somebody's head when you could have just said the human factors, for example, that are driving climate and environmental issues. But there's a place to use that language. So it's just about reading your audiences and crafting stories in a way that can lead to action and understanding from these audiences. Thank you, Farah and Ibrahima, for that. And so I will bring to Lani to possibly also add to that discussion, but even go further and share, what are the challenges that we are seeing when it comes to the situation of climate and environmental journalists in Africa. What are the experiences and what intervention needs to be put into place to really strengthen and reinforce and protect the operating environment? Lani, over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, some of the challenges that we are seeing being faced by journalists who are writing on climate and the environment is the lack of access to data and expertise. you know, there is lack of data, especially on the environment, on climate, on pollution, on what is happening within local communities. So journalists usually struggle to get around that. How do they quantify? How do they explain? How do they investigate, linking what's happening in the daily lives of people, and translating it into data? As I've said previously in my introduction, that at Oxpeckers, we use a hybridized way of telling stories. We use the traditional way of telling stories, and also uh, digital tools, open source tools that I've mentioned, like the Wild Eye and the Power Tracker, so that we can be able to fully tell a rounded story with evidence, so that we can be able to push policymakers, so that we can be able again to spark conversations around some of the um, issues and situations that our journalists will be investigating at a particular instance, like wildlife crimes, like energy pollution in communities. So that is one challenge that we are seeing journalists facing. Then again, expect to comment on these issues, these climate and environmental issues. We see that we in our communities. I'm speaking from our Southern African point of view. You are going to find that there are not a lot of experts who journalists can tend to find comments, or people who are well vested in some of these climate issues, people who are scientific in that manner, who can be able to offer information that is comprehensive for investigative journalists to be able to unpack some of the stories they'll be working on. Then another challenge that we've also seen is safety, and I can call it political pressure. You know, reporting on illegal mining, or on land grabs, or on climate and environmental issues is usually, out of a scale of 1 to 5, usually 5, 4 on the scale of risk. You know, it's, journalists are exposed to a lot of risk when they're reporting on these issues. So that is one challenge that we've seen journalists facing in Africa. One particular example that you can point to is Sipho King's incident, where he exposed coal-linked corruption in South Africa. So you can also uh, trace some of these cases of intimidation as reported by the CPJ. I think there were 5 cases of intimidation where investigative journalists were reporting on in environmental issues, on climate issues. So there's a lot of risk. That is one challenge that we usually see journalists facing. Then again, one challenge that we face as investigative journalists is funding and shrinking newsrooms, as some newsrooms are now working remotely. You know, other newsrooms do not even have environmental desks any longer because of funding. Other outlets have even shut down. So that's one challenge again that we have seen across Africa. Then again, one challenge we are witnessing is the language and literacy barriers. Uh, Climate science isn't translated into local languages uh, wherever you might want to point on the globe. So that's one other challenge that we are seeing again. Then underrepresentation of voices. You are going to see that there's a lot of underrepresentation on the global stage on climatic issues, climatic and environmental coverage. Local voices are few. So that is one challenge that we are seeing as well. Then again, we have noticed that there's a lot of surveillance and misinformation that surrounds reporting on climatic issues, on environmental crimes. Journalists are digitally tracked. They are targeted. So we at Oxpeckers, we emphasize safety, digital hygiene for investigative journalists to be protected at all times, platforms of communications that they use, encrypted devices, encrypted communications, and the like. Safety training, that's one challenge again that we see lacking, being provided to investigative journalists. Then the last part of your question, if I got you right, was what needs to be done. So there needs to be a lot of training around data journalism, geojournalism, the use of the power tracker tools that I've mentioned before, the Wild Eye tool. We also need indigenous voices being represented in these spaces, in the environment, climate. Then legal protections for whistleblowers, people we are working with as investigative journalists. Then funding, it needs to be there for deep investigations to to be conducted, for power to be held to account, for the fourth estate to be able to do its job. Funding has to be there. Then stronger networks like this platform that you've provided. Thank you so much. We need stronger networks like this for us to be able to carry out our work, for us to be able again to do cross-border investigations, for us to be able to share information, for us to be able to have shared platforms like the Signal group that you've mentioned before, sharing of resources, information, documents, trainings and the like. So that is what needs to be done. I do not know if I have sufficiently answered the question.
Yes, you have risen up to the task excellently. Thank you very much for that and given us quite a bit in terms of both challenges being experienced and how we can address those challenges. I know, before I can even give my 2 cents about that, Ibrahim, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to add to the challenges? Or
Yes.
Yes, some of
Yes,
them.
yes, very, very, very much. He said something very important, which I expect him to talk about. Do you know how these challenges is affecting our gender, most especially the women journalists?
Yes. I
Did
know
you see
Sarah is
reports
going.
coming? Do you see reports coming related to women into climate journalism reporting like this? Why? Because why? They were not encouraged from the newsroom. They were not encouraged from the newsroom. So that is one. And don't forget, we have a tradition and norms that some women cannot go and report to so area. This is like that. Limited training is really one of the biggest problems our journalists in Africa face. Because as I said before, you don't know what to report. You are already afraid of scientific terms. So how do you report what you don't know? That's why you have most of our journalists. I said, the real work that we are doing here is trying to change, transform the position of the newsroom. If newsroom can be voluntarily give us, because there are every bit of science journal, other reporters there is need to have a specialized journalist who is from every media, start from radio, start from newspaper, start from online, offline. All this could help us. But then this is what we are lacking. Why are we lacking this? Because of enough training to transform, educate, and then change thinking of our journalists. Hence, we can do that. We can change the narrative. But I mentioned before, gender is another problem in our newsroom. Women journalists are not encouraged into this science of climate journalism. If you make research, I am betting you, you will see what I told you. You will discover there is almost 90% of our newsroom are not encouraging women journalists into this field of climate journalism. Why? So hence the need also to start encouraging our editors also. Our editors need to be on board to know the importance of balancing, encouraging women into this aspect of journalism is going to help us. And again, one thing that I want to mention is one very important thing. This work cannot be done alone with us. As he mentioned, your organization is very key. Such platform could enable us. Like for the first time, I heard him, but I read one of his reports sometimes back. Yes, challenges we face, of course, I've been facing a series of challenges in the environment that I enter, issues related, as I mentioned, charcoal business, people cutting down trees to make the charcoal. How many times I've been attacked? Yes, of course, only God saved me. Secondly, issues of people who are making firewood, cutting down the trees because of high cost of kerosene, charcoal, kerosene, and other cooking stuff, and which I always am in the forefront of advocating to the government to make sure that please find a way of encouraging this renewable energy to reduce the number of trees they are cutting. Yes, I faced last month, I'm telling you, last month there was a serious problem. How can I watch my eyes, migratory birds who come from different countries come to Nigeria, and people, because of cost of meat living, a cost of buying meat, you end up shooting these migratory birds for eating. So I forwarded to the Assembly, House of Assembly, and I told them there is need to either stop this thing or I find a way to do. At the end of it, through my advocacy, apart from writing, apart from that, I now took an advocacy to where those birds are staying for the people to support. So you see, apart from this aspect of climate journalism require collaborative journalism in all aspects. So I want to say, until we join hands, like now we are collaborating, is part of it. Collaborating also with other scientists and other field of these climate issues, then we can move. I told you before, until, yes, of course, policy are there, but then how do we now interpret this into local languages? Of course, where we have the problem is not in the city, because you discover the cities, there are beautiful trees, there are beautiful structure. Now, but what do you have in the ghetto and the other communities there? They keep destroying the environment. So hence the need to communicate to them in the language they understood. This is one of the problems. Interpreting science terminologies into local languages is another thing of its own. And that's what I have to say. We have to work. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima, for adding those powerful points. But even as you say, for example, that the problem is largely in the informal settlements, which is true, but you will see in some cities, it's this rampant, for example, there's no proper urban planning. You see, like in Nairobi, for example, there's been incidences of, apartments coming up in riparian land, and this is really accelerating our challenges with the environment. So we see these problems both in the rural areas, in the informal settlements, as well as cities. So it's actually a widespread problem that we need to address. But thank you very much for that indeed. And just listening to everything else Tulani has said in terms of access to data, I just also wanted to inform everybody that there's actually a coalition in the African continent on access to data, which is an important one to engage with, because it's trying to push for increased access to data for media, for civil society organizations, for academia, and any other, because the right to information is a right that accrues to everyone. It's an important one to engage with. And also the fact that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights is currently undertaking public consultations for a possible guideline on access to data. So it's very important to ensure that this aspect of the role of media, and particularly environmental and climate reporters, is featured in this guideline. So do engage with the process, please. I will share the link for everybody who is interested to send in their input in the development of these soft law instruments. Let us also contribute to the development of policies and laws in the African continent on these important issues. I will go to Farah. Ibrahim had already started sort of teased the whole issue of around the gender aspect in climate and environmental reporting, as well as the challenges particularly facing women journalists when it comes to covering climate change issues. And I'm sure you have dealt with this issue quite a bit at WIN. So please just build upon that. What are the challenges are you seeing specifically when you look at the issue of reporting through the gender lens or any other facets of intersectionality framework? Let's just see what other challenges that female journalists or others who are in vulnerable situations experience when it comes to this kind of reporting. Farah.
Thank you, Maria Stella. And I have to say, like, thank you, Ibrahima, for starting this, because usually I'm the only person in the room talking about the gender lens or the gender aspect. So it's really encouraging and to hear that coming from Ibrahima as well. So I want to thank you so much for this. And I have to say that there's a combination of systemic challenges and ones that are unique to the climate beat that women face. I think number one, which we've already touched upon a bit, is access to resources, because climate reporting often requires travel, time for deep investigations, access to technical expertise, and all of this is expensive. And all of this requires a lot of resources, and those resources can be either through targeted grants like SIRI or institutional support through the media organizations themselves, because these are not, just go out for an hour or over the phone. You need to go there and you need to build that rapport with the communities as well to be able to report. And that brings me to the other point, which is safety and mobility, which are really, really important and key concerns. A lot of the vulnerable communities that are most often affected by climate change are in very hard to reach areas. And for women journalists or journalists with disabilities, there's very high safety risks. And this can be a barrier. So even if you haven't gone there and been through something, but just the idea of having to travel that far to go into those areas might be a barrier and just turn a lot of women journalists off from even pursuing it. And then another issue is editorial prioritization. So a lot of newsrooms still look at climate as maybe not such a hard news topic. It's not politics, it's not, economics that are happening right now, but also it's not as flashy as sports or entertainment. So it means that stories about things like women's agricultural losses or community-led adaptations, they struggle to get visibility and get prioritization and resources from the media organization. So even if you're in a media organization, even if you're a woman, even if you're able and go through all these barriers, the media organizations and the editors still don't give it priority that it needs. And then finally, there are the cultural biases. A lot of women reporting on technical subjects like energy policy or like climate finance or things that are very technical can face skepticism from sources, but also from the audiences, which makes giving them access much, much harder. And I want to say that even through all of this, it's important, it's not just a moral imperative to encourage more women and more diverse, journalists to take part in climate coverage, but because it's also necessary for like a holistic look at climate crisis and climate coverage, because as your lived experience is different, you are going to look at things from a different perspective. You're going to see things that maybe are not often covered. So if we actually really want to get a good overview and really understand how climate coverage and climate crisis is affecting different communities and different people, we do need to have that diversity in the people who are doing the work itself, doing the journalism itself. Because I'm in Cairo. So if I'm reporting about climate from Cairo, it's different from, somebody who's in Nairobi, from somebody who's in Nigeria. It's very different perspectives, but also if even within the country itself, having journalists that are not just also parachuting from the capital and going just to the communities to report on them for a couple of days, but working with journalists and building that journalistic capacity with the people within the communities themselves. So it's not, we don't report on them whenever we just have, a little bit of time or a little bit of resources, but building that connection with them over time. and maybe giving them some tools and some training. So there are journalists from those communities. There are journalists in remote areas who also keep us posted, in the capital where we are, but keep us posted, and we get to see the evolution. And then the climate coverage is not something we do once a year or twice a year, but it's continuous, and it becomes part of the news agenda every day. So yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I'll actually come back to you when we now start talking about solutions and working together as stakeholders, just to pick up on some of the things you've already mentioned. But I want us to move to something else that we have alluded to in one way or another from all the presenters, which is the issue of now accountability from the duty bearers, be it states, be it businesses, or any other stakeholder. How do we push for this accountability as climate and environmental reporters, or even how in, playing the educative role, we can help, CSOs, we can help any other stakeholder push for accountability from these duty bearers? Let me go to Lydia on this.
Thanks, Mary Stella. I think for accountability for us, number one, it could be something that would engage a lot of inclusive partnership and participation. If you look at Rwanda, for example, previously there was a collaboration of journalists on environment who had been trained on environmental journalism and training by the Thompson Foundation, and their work accurately covered, deforestation, mining, climate threats, and actually pushed for public accountability and engaged communities in those areas where irrigation was supposed to have happened. So I think when it comes to accountability, we need to have inclusive participation, the communities, the journalists, everyone on board, because the valued outcome for this were investigations that journalists put out from their training, which would also be the next one if journalists are trained. They help to shape discourse around environmental law gaps. They help to underscore the role of journalism in holding authorities to account. So I think inclusive participation definitely would be that. And then, of course, capacity building. Capacity building in terms of what targeted training we can have for environmental issues, journalist investigative techniques, data analysis, physical safety for the journalists in themselves, press freedom groups that we work with that may not actually be specific to climate and environmental journalism, as we have noted that there's a lot of gaps in that area. And then, of course, accountability would come across with creating awareness. A lot of awareness. If you look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project, it had a lot of awareness creating and understanding by different sectors of the public, the global public, regional public, that there was a lot of attention in the whole River Nile area, from Egypt down to Uganda. Everyone was involved in all the issues that came up to raise awareness on all the environmental and geopolitical stakes involved. So I believe in a lot of capacity training for people to know, creating awareness and involving everybody, inclusive participation, but also accessing data. You have mentioned that there is also a coalition for access to data. I think that's very important. People cannot request or hold people to account over things they have no idea about. I believe transparency and access to data will bring people more closer to open partnerships, open governments, that people have information. If a dam was supposed to be constructed with minor alterations to environment, how is it possible that with maybe rich investors now it has created some forms of environmental damage and human rights issues in an environment? So is this information readily available for people? Most of the people on the panel have mentioned a lot of gaps and access to data and a lot of less reporting on climate and environmental issues. I think creating awareness and research. I can say IPI has gone a long way in creating and trailblazing in this, creating, there's a report on climate journalism under fire. The report can be shared later in the chat, but there's a lot that needs to be created for people to be able to be informed so that they can also hold their governments or states or areas to account. Those would be my few cents on that issue.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. You've really emphasized, underscored the whole issue of, information through very different facets of how we need information to guide action as well as accountability. And I want also to Lani to add to that. I know you mentioned that you might have to jump off the call soon, but maybe just add to that in terms of how we can ensure greater accountability from the duty bearers.
So just adding on to what the previous eloquent speaker just said, let's turn the evidence into action. Let's turn all that data into action. Let's expose hidden harm. Let's track promises versus delivery. Let us amplify community evidence. Let us follow the money. Let us trigger legal and policy action. Let's build public pressure. And again, let's create watchdog infrastructure. I think the bottom line there is we are going to hold power to account as journalists if we use this approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I see our time is running very quickly, and I want to jump to another aspect of our discussion, which again, we have alluded to in one or another from the different panelists, and that's the issue of partnerships. And this is something very key to the project that IPI launched on SEJA, in the sense that how can we build partnerships? We seek to build strong partnerships on climate and environmental reporting, and also just strengthening this field. But what initiatives are we already seeing beyond this in terms of how can we build strong and sustained stakeholder networks, as well as community support for climate and environmental journalism generally, as well as the journalists themselves? I see, Ibrahima, you've had your hand up for a while. Can you add to that, and then maybe just briefly talk about any intervention that you had, but the issue of stakeholder networks and community support, how can we build upon that? What initiatives are we seeing? Ibrahima. I think you're muted if you're speaking, I'm not sure.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to say once more, thank you for the opportunity to kick this question. Now, in this aspect here, we have what we started already for the past 3 years called Media Monthly Climate Hangout. Now, in this hangout, we have 50 journalists every month. We used to meet in a place there. And those are multimedia, for example, online, offline, social media, all of them. That is one aspect. Now, collaboration, we have team of volunteer scientists. Now, journalists, us cannot do it because of this scientific investigation, deep down fact finding. We have to collaborate with them. Thirdly, the civil society organization working on the environment, and also the non-governmental organization working on climate change. We used to assemble ourselves in a big hall here where we normally communicate on issues to deliberate it, exchange idea, sharing views on the research work that give a journalist. Like, for example, there are many of my journalists working on investigative reporting. Now, some NGOs can dig out issues related to this where the journalist cannot have access to go beyond his limitation, but with such information is going to enable us to go beyond the limitation, to dig down and bring a factual reporting. That is one. Secondly, with the collaboration we have with all our scientists, civil society organization, most stories are being built by our journalists. Why? Because you will be hearing series of reports on issues like this one now, currently working about the species that we normally see, like the vulture in here in Nigeria. We don't see vulture. We don't see other species like fish species facing extinction. What is causing this? We have an association of fishermen in Nigeria, which they normally come to this workshop. Now, when we meet monthly, those people will tell us the species of fish facing extinction. Now, for us as journalists to go there and dig out and fold out these stories and syndicate to the authorities also to come on board. So collaboration here is very, very important. And that's, as you can see here, in this monthly climate hangout, even the governments are also involved. So collaborating with stakeholders, policymakers, we always meet to see that we make the society a better living for our children. And also the trees that are also facing extinction. There are horticulturists there. They also come to share their report because it's a one-day affairs. From morning till evening, you'll be getting series of reports because as journalists, we have a limitation to cover issues related to these scientific terms. Yet that is why this collaboration is very, very important. Thirdly, we meet with, because there are also issues related to how do we change this attitude of people from killing our marine animals? Yeah, using the faith-based organization, yes, of course. Collaboration with them because of changing attitude of dumping trash into the river. Annually, we lost millions of marine animals, and nobody is talking about them. Of recently, we say we are fighting against Lassa fever. Now, the Lassa fever discarded papers is killing the large number of our domestic animals. Nobody is reporting about this. So you see, collaborative journalism is the future. So that is why as science climate journalists, collaborating with all stakeholders in Nigeria, which we talked about these issues, this forum opens us chances. That is one. Secondly, the African Institute of Waste and Environmental Studies normally give an opportunity during its annual workshop, identifying the journalists who write 10 reports on climate journalism every year. And the reports are unusual reports that we normally see or we hear. These are reports related to the unusual stories you don't hear related to climate change affecting human life, animals, migrations of internally displaced people. We are not talking about how climate change is causing the large number of migrations of human beings, animal, and other living organisms due to the extinctions of our forestry today. So you can see our forum, I gave an example. I took an example of our forum, this media hangout, climate hangout. It gives us the opportunity whereby it serves as a forum whereby all of us, every stakeholders, science, climate, authorities on board, we meet, we strategize. As well as for us, we have, you can see a journalist in the month can have up to 5 or 6 reports that you can take in. So in as far as you have 50 journalists picking different stories from all stakeholders, the target is to disseminate information, changing the narrative and making life better for both human, animal, and living organism. And then we are getting there gradually. I want to stop here to give opportunity for others.
Yes, thank you, Ibrahima, for that. And maybe you could even put a link on the chat if there's an opportunity for others to join the climate hangout and contribute, also benefit from the discussions and the insights that are shared there with the hangout. Thank you for that, Ibrahima. And I'll go to you, Farah. I don't know if you have any other initiatives that you could also add to that in terms of how stakeholders are networking, how are we building community support? Over to you, Farah.
I can give a slightly different perspective here because we have large network of women journalists across 3 regions, and we also have a large network of high-level women media executives across 3 regions. So I would like to invite you all, IPI, but also everybody who's here, who's looking to tap into these networks. Please do reach out. We do have these networks. So if it can start from just being an individual journalist. If you're working at a cross-regional investigation and you want somebody to help you, and you want to connect to a journalist in specific country, we probably have someone there we can connect you with. And we probably have someone who can connect you to somebody. These large networks, and especially because these are women journalists, which are not there's not a lot of networks for women journalists specifically who are experts in many things. meetings, but also our women editors and media executives. So if you want to pitch a story to them about this, or a collaborative project across big media organizations in Africa or the Arab region or Southeast Asia, you can also please do reach out to us. We would be happy for anybody who's interested to tap into our networks and tap into these resources. Come train, come speak, and that is our part in contributing to the larger community building initiative. And also, if you're running a research or if you're running a survey to look at specific issues, we do have those networks as well. So from the journalism and the work on the ground, but also from the policy making and the understanding and research perspective, let's also collaborate there.
Thank you, Farah. And please share any link that you have on the chat if anybody wants to engage. I think we have about 10 minutes or so left to go. So I really want to open the floor up to the participants in case you have a comment to make, any question. But just looking at our chat here, I see one from Dadi Sadiki, who says journalists are facing serious challenges in environmental reporting. Journalists lack the financial resources needed to cover stories related to climate change and environmental issues. Media houses also pose a challenge due to misunderstanding or lack of awareness about the importance of this reporting, which even Yafara mentioned, Ibrahima, you've mentioned, Tulani, and also Lydia, all our panelists really. And so here they're asking, what will be your advice to overcome these challenges? That will be a good one as a final thoughts from all the panelists in terms of just what can we do all of us together. But if any participant would like to raise their hand, please feel free to do that. I just look at the Q&A, they're just calls for connecting, Farah and the rest. Ibrahima, there's a question here about the Hangout. So please do share a link, and maybe when you're giving your final thoughts, you can elaborate in terms of how people can engage on that, or just answer there on the chat on how people can join the Hangouts, they can participate in the Hangouts. Let me see if I am missing anybody here in terms of a question as I wait for any hand to be raised. We'd love to also hear your voice. Ellie here, Ellie Akisa.
Hedwig is a hand raised.
I see Ibrahima's hand, but from the panelists, from the participants, are you seeing a hand?
Yes, Hedwig Arnaitwe. Hedwig, please go ahead.
Yes.
And then afterwards, Ahmed Latif Tayo as well.
Okay, wonderful. Hedwig, you have the floor.
Maybe unmute her. At times you can't unmute yourself if you're not a panelist or a host.
I've allowed her to talk.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
It's a privilege to be here to learn more about something that I'm really passionate about. My name is Hedwig Arinitwe. I'm from Uganda. I'm a journalist and I lead the team at Climate Women Media Action. So for us, we basically train journalists, female journalists, to report impactfully on climate change. This conversation has really brought me back to think about my work as an environmental journalist. In 2021, I had to cover an investigation about illegal sand mining in Uganda, particularly in Kasese, a district that experiences flooding a lot. So my 3 months of uncovering this issue and investigating and going deep were summarized by a big state actor and a company that deals in cement, who came up and was saying, if I reveal this information to the public, they'll take me to court and they are willing to go the length and I'm going to lose the case. Now, I was covering this story as a freelance contributor and the media house was not willing to go the length because I had no contract with them. So my 3 months of covering this issue ended up into a feature story of 750 words. It had so much, but I had nothing else to do. So in Uganda, censorship is a big, big problem. You will have to choose either you want life or you want to do the story. someone will shut you up, and because they have power and authority and it's being misused in many other ways, you will have to end up letting the story pass. And there are so many stories like mine. So many journalists have shut up about issues. There's a particular influencer on X who was doing environmental campaigns and helping speak up about issues, speak about Sudil building in wetlands. Sudil is a big shot here who builds hotel and all those things. And he would keep following up. He would go to the places, take photos, take videos, put them on X. And people had started following his campaign and picking interest. And I've been following him to see how it's going. And it's been 4 months now, he has not posted on his account. And I believe he was threatened into shutting up. But a personal individual, he's someone who is not willing to give up. So if he gave up doing it, it must have been something, and must have been someone who is telling him, your life is at risk. So that's why we need to train journalists. I was thinking to myself, maybe if that time I had learned about AI tools like I know now, maybe I could have used satellite maps or geotags or, to find out some information that I didn't have to go to the ground for these people to know who I am or to see me or to know that I'm a woman and they can easily threaten me into not doing something and, all of that. So I think it's important for us now to train journalists to know that there are alternatives that they can use to get information. I'm not saying when we should tell journalists not to go to the field and pick information, but if their life is at risk for this particular information that they are looking for physically, then we can have other alternatives like using AI tools, geotags like Oxpeckers has those open source tools, so that we're able to get this information and not let the story completely die out because someone has said cut that story. Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Maristella, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Hedwig, for sharing your experience. Just listening to you, we can already see issues of censorship that we have mentioned, issues of judicial harassment that even we need to explore even further in other platforms. But thank you very much for sharing that your experience. I think now I'll give the floor to Ahmed. He just needs to be given the chance to speak, both Ahmed and Eli Akiza. Nompilo, have you allowed Ahmed to speak?
Let me check again. Ahmed, I've allowed Ahmed to speak. Ahmed, can you hear us?
Yes.
Ahmed, I've allowed you to speak.
And also Eli Akiza. Ahmed, you can proceed. Or Eli.
I've allowed Eli as well.
Hello, Mary, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hello everyone. I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak and to attend and listen to this wonderful session and wonderful speakers who have really passed us through an interesting session. I would like to thank you guys for bringing out something like collaborative journalism, of which we've been lacking. My name is Akiza Eli. I'm a multimedia journalist. I'm attached to Water Journalists Africa, Infonile, and I currently work with one of the biggest media organizations in Uganda, which is Vision Group. And last year I won the Uganda Conservation Media Award. So we've been really working on conservation, though in our country, our efforts are rarely appreciated. Some of the few points I would like to raise is gender reporting. We still lack women in the field of reporting. Most of them fear the field. Most of them feel they are weak. They can't do this when actually they can do better even than men. Another thing is investigative journalism. most of us who mostly deal in investigative reporting, we most especially feel intimidation from political leaders, from people who have their own benefits, who have their own interest in issues that we will be investigating on. Most especially the people encroaching on our mighty rivers and lakes and swamps. So we most especially feel intimidations and those that cut timber in designated areas like forest and all those areas. Another thing, our local people that we do report to, most of them lack information. They do things that may create impact at a later time, like sand mining, like because they do these things not because they want to do them, but lacking alternative ways of earning. Let's say if you are sand mining, you're given another way of earning and you leave the swamp. So most of the African governments come and chase these people from the areas where they're encroaching, like swamps and rivers where they have been mining sand. They chase them away, but they don't give them alternative ways of earning. That's why you see such problems have persisted, and we keep on mobilizing, but still, when you don't give someone an alternative, remember this is the only land he has, and this is the only job he knows. So if you don't give them an alternative way of earning, at the end of the day, you'll find them finding their way back to the swamp to do sand mining. When actually, at the end of the day, they are the ones that will be affected. Then maybe lastly, journalists, we need to have more of the trainings because the tools keep on coming and outdating the tools we've been using. Like AI tools now are many that could help us even do the stories without being exposed to the challenges mentioned above. So, and most especially journalists who are working with local media houses, blogs, and all that.
All right. Thank you, Ellie, for that. Ahmed, you have 1 minute.
They lack information. They need more training can be yeah can be brought to everyone. At least if you broaden the number of journalists or the number of people you reach out to every year, I think the information and this campaign can create an impact. I thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ellie. Ahmed?
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. You have, let's say, 30 seconds to do your
Yeah,
intervention.
thank you
We
very
are
much. Yes, Dr. Ahmed
Yes.
Latif Tayo is my name. I'm calling from Nigeria. I'm the Registrar General of Africa Institute of Waste Management and Environmental Studies. The challenges we are facing in Nigeria is highly enormous, and I believe that is what constitutes to our challenges in exploring the needed expert as per professionalism in environmental journalism. What we need ultimately is how to harness the intellectual capacity of our people, how to have more people trained mindedly and professionally to come up with the idea that will enhance and bring about environmental journalism into limelight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And finally, before we have the last words from our panelists, I want to invite Erastus just to share briefly in 2 minutes or so just about your experiences as a journalist working in climate and environmental issues. Erastus, over to you.
Well, my name is Erastus Asaridonko. I am an environmental journalist with the Multimedia Group in Ghana. Let me say I have been covering the environment since 2015, precisely the impact of illegal gold mining on water bodies, forest reserves, and settlements. Currently, as we speak, 60% of all major rivers and streams in Ghana have been polluted and contaminated. As we speak, major rivers that serve as a treatment intake point for the Ghana Water Company has been polluted. We started documenting this by fetching samples from all the major rivers and putting them to test in one of our major universities. And the results that came, over 200% in some instances, heavy metals.
Let me just interrupt you a bit. Can we mute Ibrahima, Hedwig, and Eli so that we can hear Erastus very well? Thank you. Erastus, please continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So we tested samples from all the major rivers we have in Ghana, and it showed high levels. We have that data, which shows in some instances over 200% above the WHO standards of arsenic, mercury, lead, cadmium, chromium, and other heavy metals in our water bodies. In fact, if you've been to Ghana, you realize that every major river you pass is looking milky brown because of illegal mining. The polluting sources are, one, direct mining on these water bodies in using technology referred to as shamfan, introduced by the Chinese on our water bodies. It sits directly on the water body, turns the sediments and washes it back into the river. And we have hundreds of these sitting on major rivers across the country. When it comes to forest reserves, we are depleting our forest reserves rapidly. Within the past 8 years, the data shows we've depleted over 4,000 hectares of forest, turned into pits and gullies due to illegal haphazard gold mining. The challenge with controlling this is because of political influence. And we see that a lot of political actors use their influence to back illegal miners to mine in forest reserves. And so controlling it has become difficult. It's like the government that is supposed to enforce the laws to improve sustainable mining or encourage sustainable mining itself has its members doing the illegality. So it's like being in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up by the handle. And that has become very difficult. The challenges we have faced covering this sector, myself and my team, is that there are not many journalists like us going to the ground to bring the evidence, to show to the public and to influence policy direction on this. Few of us are covering that sector, environment. And so it puts a target on our backs. We have been detained in forest reserves by armed illegal miners twice. The last one was the end of 2024. Getting to the elections, myself and my team members were abducted by a team of illegal miners who were fully armed, who were taken to a secluded area in the forest. It was only God who saved us, but we sustained a number of assaults, before they left us in that situation. Until now, when we filed a case with the police, nothing substantial has been done about it. In fact, at a point in time in one forest reserve, when we were covering the devastation there, we met over 35 fully armed military personnel, government military personnel, who were protecting that illegal miner. And we had to be detained in the forest. Our footages were deleted. Our cameras were broken. My driver was assaulted many times. And by God's grace, we hit one of our devices. And so that is how we're able to tell that story. So we have put together quite a number of documentaries since 2015, major amongst them, Destruction for Gold, which is on YouTube, Poison for Gold, which details the health impact of illegal mining in Ghana, is also on YouTube. We've done Forest Under Siege, with specific mention of one forest which has thousands of hectares turned into pits and gullies. That one, Forest Under Siege, is also on YouTube. we constantly, myself, face a number of threats physically. I'm not in the country at the moment because of that. Constantly, I've become a target. And so people send life-threatening messages, death threats to my phone. 3 days ago, somebody who follows me on Facebook was sent a message that he was going to be sacrificed to serve as a lesson for me, that I have denied them the right to recoup their investments. And so they said in plain words that his headless body will serve as a lesson to me. If they will not get me, they will get him. Whilst we report these things to the police, there are some police personnel who are also very corrupt. The system, the justice system, to try to get justice in some of these things and to get protection is sometimes very limited. And it puts some of us in a very dangerous position. So the other speakers were talking about gender. So if men who have been viewed in society as more masculine and more powerful to do some of these things are being chased out like this, it discourages female journalists from going into that sector. It has also discouraged quite a number of journalists from going into that sector because they don't see justice served when some of us are arrested, some of us are beaten or assaulted and hounded every day. It becomes a difficulty. So basically, my family and I have become targets, but somebody needs to save the environment. And we have to do this and do this safely. And that is why I'm grateful to the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, for RSF, for coming to our aid many times and filing reports on us to help us get the needed space to be able to do what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erastus, for sharing your experience. And we are very sorry. Well, it's unfortunate what you've had to go through, and even your family as well as even your friends. It's unfortunate, but it shows the importance of us coming together and ensuring, we have the support mechanisms, the safety and support mechanisms for our journalists. But thank you very much for sharing your insights. And both you and Hedwig, my colleague Tom Rhodes has requested for your contacts, because it would be great to even, because we have run out of time, but it would be great to have another platform to just listen to the experiences of journalists, see how we can be more resilient in this field, how we can support each other, how we can reinforce the security measures and safety measures for journalists. So please do share your contacts, Erastus and Hedwig, with my colleague Tom Rhodes, and we can reach out and see how to take this conversation further. I apologize, we are out of time. We did start at like 10 minutes late, so I'm sorry about that. So I just want to give the panelists, and I'll be very strict about the 30 seconds, just your final words in 1 or 2 sentences, so that we can close this off. But I am really grateful to our panelists for sharing their insights. I'm very grateful for the participants who share their insights. So I'll start with Ibrahima in two sentences. Just let us know your final words, and then we can close off our webinar. Okay, I think Ibrahima is muted.
Okay,
yes.
I'm here. Can
Thank
I?
you. Yes, please.
Okay, simply I want to say, as we are reporting climate into international words, like using so many big standards, we should also be localizing it into the local context. I have to say, be localizing issues related to climate change into the normal languages, into our traditions, in such a way we can disseminate information. Secondly, before I go, I want to encourage our journalists, despite the challenges, we face challenges every day, but then we have to push further. I have been facing these challenges, but that doesn't discourage me. And I keep encouraging female journalists to join this. And I have female journalists here, which we are training. So for the future of journalism, I want to end up is by collaborative journalism. Just like what those other ladies from contributing said, there is need for collaborative journalism anywhere in this world. Thank you very much. Till we see you next time.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and thank you very much for your insights. They are very insightful. Farah, 2 sentences.
Yeah, I think building upon what everybody's saying and hearing those experiences, I have two things to say. I think the first is there is a need to have this kind of conversation, I think, at an editor's level, because these are the editors who are in charge of keeping the journalists safe, but also assigning them. But also, I think editors need to be involved in those conversations very, very clearly. And the second is there's a lot of similarities between journalists who are covering climate and other journalists who are covering some wars or protests or anything that has a safety element. So there's also good to build those networks so journalists do not feel like they are isolated. And I think these networks exist. And I think Ahmed maybe was referring to CPJ, but there are these networks that already exist. So please, if you are facing this, make sure that you tap into those networks and find solidarity with your fellow journalists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Farah. Finally, Lydia.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. And for me, my final comment would be that climate and environmental journalism is very critical for protecting public interest in Africa. And I think from the discussions we have had, an effective multi-stakeholder collaboration to strengthen this form of journalism is very, very pertinent. And I think we would mutually reinforce ecosystems where journalists, civil society, and government, donors work together to ensure accurate, impactful, and safe reporting, moving away from, ad hoc partnerships, but sustained relationships that address all the structural challenges that have been mentioned today, including, limited resources, threats to press freedom, and access to credible information. So I would still call upon all of us to join that signal group and work together to ensure that as climate change intensifies vulnerabilities across the continent, such journalism will be key to accountability, public awareness, and informed decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And I echo your call for participants to join the Signal group, because I'm already seeing in the chat there's great interest. I'm very happy to see people sharing their contacts, because we've been trying to build this database of journalists, of organizations that are who are working on issues of climate and environmental issues. And this webinar in itself, we've already gotten new contacts. So thank you for those who are sharing their contacts. I'm hoping from our end, we'll stay a bit so that we can collect all the contacts that we have received on the chat function. So thank you very much for that. I echo again the calls, thanking our panelists for such eloquence, for such wisdom, for such knowledge that you have shared with us, and really guiding us through this conversation. Thank you very much. And thank you to the panel, to the participants who have been with us from the beginning up until now. Thank you very much. And also for sharing your insights. I hope we'll continue with this conversation. This is just not a once-off. This is a continued conversation. And based on what our panelists have said, we need to work together. We need to, all of us contribute to this discussion. We need to diffuse this knowledge beyond the cities, beyond to our localities, to all the different facets of societies, all the vulnerable and minority groups. It has to be a very widely spoken conversation, because it's an issue that will affect this generation and future generations. And also thank you to our interpreters who have ensured that we are really living to that principle of inclusivity. So thank you very much to that. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues in the background. Nompilo, you've seen her through the emails, and she's been directing us everything there at the back. Thank you, Nompilo. Thank you to Georgie, and also thank you to Tom Rhodes. I wish they could just open their camera so that we can see them for a bit. Okay, Ella, I think it's just background noise, but otherwise, thank you all for staying with us, and I wish you
Mary, thank you so much for today, and wish you well.
Thank you.